Okay, folks, it's your buddy Mike Messier, just making sure we're live. We're gonna have a little live interactive wrestle chat tonight. It's Tuesday night, July 11th, the 11th day of July. We're right in the middle of summer here in the good old US of A, and just trying to make sure that this thing is actually live and up and running. And I believe we are. So here we go. Thanks for bearing with me. If you happen to be a subscriber here and you're not a pro wrestling fan, I'd suggest you go over to my other channels. One, Mike Messier for Mike's Instant Movie Reviews and my Angry Life Rants, and also for One Man and a Camera Films, which is my own films that I make. So let's talk about the topic of the day and what brings us up. Today I posted a little harmless meme, which inspired some debate. I basically wrote, so let me find it, the actual thing. My post in a couple of the wrestling groups, the Foreign Object that I run, my buddy Jimmy Faluca, Mark Theek run a couple of groups, Sean McKenna runs Wrestling Fans. So that post-Mania, Cody will just beat Roman at SummerSlam narrative is shot to shit then. That's what I posted. I put it in one of those fun little red boxes with the white letters would pop out. My old buddy from overseas, I guess I'm overseas for him, but Chris Old, who I don't agree with often, or he doesn't agree with me, but even he understood my point. After WrestleMania of this year, 2023, there was a lot of people who had predicted that Cody Rhodes would end the reign of good old Roman Reigns. Cody Rhodes, they predicted, would beat Roman Reigns. I actually made a video. I believe I said the odds were 80% Roman Reigns to retain, 20% for Cody to win the title. I was right. A lot of people were wrong. They thought that this was the end of the bloodline and this was, Cody Rhodes winning the title, finishing the dream, and all this crap. And I just pointed out, like, look, Roman is the creation of Junior McMahon, of Triple H. He is their thoroughbred horse, so to speak. They trust this guy. They trust his family. And for them to have this property, this investment of their guy, Jimmy Faluca's chiming in, and Jimmy and I are going to do a podcast together real soon about summertime wrestling. Jimmy Faluca is a very informed fan. I'm doing fine, Anthony. Good to see you in here, buddy. I'm trying to show your comments. But my point here is for the WWE to invest all this energy, time, and especially money into the Roman Reigns project. Now, remember, Roman Reigns was not just a guy who had the title as a heel, and he's done pretty damn well. I want to give him credit. But for 4 years as a babyface, they were pushing and pushing and pushing Roman Reigns down our collective throats, and people weren't accepting it. I mean, do you remember that WrestleMania when it was Brock and Roman Reigns, Brock defending the title against Roman Reigns, I believe in Florida somewhere, maybe Orlando, and the fans were booing pretty much the whole match out of the building? That was the one when Braun Strowman teamed up with Nikki, the kid. Let's see here. He is their yes, exactly, Facebook user. He is their homegrown product that they pushed, whether he was over or not, because they are trying to push a narrative that they can make anyone a top star, anyone to be a top star, whether the fans like it or not. That is what Roman Reigns represents. This guy, whoever Facebook user is, please put your name because I want to give you credit. You just summarized my whole rant. I can go now, but I won't. I want to babble on, but I think you pretty much nailed it, buddy. Whoever you are, Facebook user, you pretty much nailed it. And so for them to take Cody Rhodes, fresh from AEW, fresh from taking that hammer and destroying the throne, the metaphorical throne of Triple H on one of the early AEW pay-per-views. Cody Rhodes, who, the whole gimmick is he went from, unwanted to irreplaceable. Even Daniel Cormier gave him credit on the last UFC this past weekend, which was an excellent show, by the way. But Cody Rhodes, his whole gimmick, even in the repackaged WWE version, is the guy who went elsewhere, a guy who went to the indies, a guy who created his own promotion with the help of another billionaire, Tony Khan, and so forth. So we all know the story. I don't have to give it back to you. But the point is, They want to use that guy. They want to use the independent guy, the Cody Rhodes guy, the independent, wrestle in the VFW, wrestle Mike Bennett, wrestle, Hans Schmickeldick in some, restroom somewhere or whatever the fuck. They want to make that guy an example. And the example is not that you leave the WWE, you find yourself somewhere else, you create a promotion to go against us and for AEW Dynamite to be NXT every Wednesday night. That's not the guy they put their main strap on. That's the guy that they humiliate. Oh, Jimmy Faluca with a nice comment. Very good, Jimmy. And Jimmy and I will be doing a podcast soon, maybe this weekend or next week, about summertime wrestling memories. But I'll get to this question in a second, Anthony. That's the guy that you humiliate. And when I say humiliate, look, Cody Rhodes is getting very well paid to take the pin and look up at the lights at WrestleMania this past year. When I say humiliate, it's the character. Like, if this stuff was real, okay, and we all know that it's not, I don't have to lecture you. You don't have to lecture me. But if the character gave a shit, which we know that the real man, the real Cody Runnels or whatever his real fucking name is, he doesn't give a shit. He's getting paid. But if he actually cared, if the character cared, let's talk about it. What do we want to talk about? If he actually gave a flying fuck, then he would realize he's being publicly flogged. He's being publicly humiliated. His character is being publicly disciplined. The bad boy. What's that Bible verse? The son. What's that? One of my Catholic friends, Jimmy, you're Catholic. What's that term? The bipolar son, or the not the bipartisan son. It's the son that goes away and comes back. You know what I mean? So basically, they have to humiliate him. They have to put him in his place. Scorpion fan has a comment. Mikey, dare God we talk Matt Hardy and Jim Cornette. Their hate Twitter amid Ryback was threatening those podcasts by Pollard. And Logan Paul Prime may get him in hot water. I know about half of what you're talking about. You can write the details, buddy. The Jim Cornette. I mean, look, Cornette. I like Cornette. You know that I like Cornette. I like Vince Russo too. Vince Russo's, I would consider him a personal friend of mine. He's someone that's put me on his podcast. I've done things for Russo. I like Russo. But Cornette is a legend. Cornette's very funny. The way that Cornette stays in people's mind rent-free is he gets into these Twitter things, and he and Brian Last do their podcast, and they always seem to act like the victim, like Cornette and Brian. When they do get in these little Twitter beefs with people, they're always the victim, blah, blah, blah. But they stir the shit. And if you lived through the 80s and you saw Jim Cornette as a manager, this is what he's good at. Cornette has taken his managerial skills, the leader of the Midnight Express, the manager of Big Bubba Rogers, and he's reapplied it to the podcast world. And I give him a clap. I mean, but the thing is, guys, I saw somebody had posted the whole Twitter exchange between Matt Hardy and Cornette. I couldn't sit there and fucking read it. That's a waste of my life to sit there and read these two assholes. I mean, if anything, you got to give Cornette credit. I think he's pushing 60, maybe 65. He's actually in pretty good shape for him. I mean, he was never an athletic guy, Cornette, but I mean, he's, for all the cheeseburgers and all the Dairy Queen stuff that he's eaten, he looks pretty good for his age. And he has a wife that's 15 or 20 years younger than him. And yes, they do their personal business, as we have all come to learn. But Cornette's doing fine. Matt Hardy, on the other hand, I've got nothing against Matt Hardy. He's my favorite of the two Hardys. I mean, that's not saying much. That's like being the tallest midget in the room. The prodigal son. Thank you, Jimmy. Yes, they are making an example of him. And even if he faces Rome again, he will lose. Correct. The thing with Cornette and the thing with Matt Hardy, let me get back on Matt Hardy for a second. He's my favorite of the two Hardys. I think he takes himself and his life a little bit more seriously. Jeff Hardy, I have some real issues with. I feel bad for him, but at the same time, I've lost my amount of sympathy for Jeff Hardy. I've done rants on that. Jeff Hardy is an addict. Jeff Hardy has had plenty of time to get help. He's had plenty of offers from WWE, and I think AEW put him in through some type of, therapy, rehab type of thing. Very interesting. Mikey, most exciting movie coming, Beetlejuice 2. Looking forward to it. On my other channel, buddy, Scorpion fan, One Mike Messier, I do the film reviews. let's talk wrestling here. But I am looking forward to Beetlejuice 2. If Winona Ryder is in it, especially nice to see her on the big screen again. But as far as this goes, Matt Hardy is he's a good wrestler, but he's starting to get that wrestler hump. You know, like when you see the wrestler and they're kind of crouched over, like the top of their back gets to be hunched over. We see that with Matt Hardy now. And if you remember that thing, I think in the pandemic era where he had that match with Sammy Guevara and he fell off the ladder, it looked like he literally died. You know, like people use that term, oh, he died, he got killed. I don't like that term. When someone's injured, they say, oh, he died, he killed him. But that one, he looked like he did die. I mean, Matt Hardy was lying there on the concrete. His mouth was a gap. He looked like a fish out of water. He was not moving his body. I think Matt Hardy in this battle with Jim Cornette, it's just proving, Matt, that, you know, Matt Hardy needs something to do. He's trying to stay relevant. Cornette stays relevant with his mind and his mouth and his typing and his action figures and his appearances on Dark Side of the Ring. So I think in that battle, you have to give it up for Jim Cornette because he wins the battle before it's even fought, if you ask me. But Matt Hardy does have an attractive wife and a bunch of kids with her, so give him that. Mike, Dirty Dominic Mysterio, he's a good heel. But as a wrestler, he's horrible. Next week, he will challenge Wes Lee for his NXT North American Championship. I will tell you this, gentlemen. I don't watch NXT on a regular basis, except I go to the fucking live shows because I'm here in Florida. And it's almost like this. I'm actually, in my own mind, trying to relive the glory days of Florida wrestling, the 70s, the 80s, even back in the 60s, the Eddie Graham era, Billy Jack Haynes, you know, superstar Billy Graham, Dusty Rhodes, of course, Kevin Sullivan, Mark Lewin. I'm trying to, in some bizarre way, honor the past of Florida wrestling by attending whatever I can attend here in Florida while I live here. So I go to Daly's Place for AEW. And NXT does these shows here in Florida, guys, that are $20 for an assigned seat. And if you want to just do a general seating and take your chances, it's $10. And the venues are so small. They're like 200, 300 seat venues. The wrestlers are right up close. I've been taking a bunch of still photos and putting them up on this channel, actually. If you look in my short section, you can see my photography from the NXT shows. That's when I like NXT, when I can see it in person, because I feel like I'm honoring the ghosts of wrestling past. I'm not necessarily there, you know, to put money in Vince's pocket or Triple H's pocket, or even to honor these current wrestlers, but I wish them well. I hope they all have careers and stay safe and get out of it whatever they want to put into it. And it's fun, to be quite honest with you. So I do support NXT when they do live events. I go to them. And you can see the clips and the photographs here on the channel. But as far as watching every week, I will try to make an attempt, buddy, to watch this match on your behalf and give you my thoughts and feedback. Somebody was telling me I had to watch the Donovan Dijak match from I believe the last NXT pay-per-view. They said that Dijak stole the match, stole the show. And as you may know, I've known Donovan Dijak for 7 or 8 years because he used to wrestle for Top Rope Promotions in Fall River, Massachusetts. And I talked with Dijak several times. He was always a guy. I didn't see him as being a big wrestling fan per se, but he was definitely an athletic guy and was doing all types of flips off the ropes for a guy that's, you know, almost 7 feet or is 7 feet. Dijak's a gamer, so he definitely takes his athleticism seriously. I don't think he'd be able to list the top WWE champions, which gets us back to our point, guys. Let's get back on track here. Cody's not winning this belt. Let's put it this way. He's not pinning Roman Reigns to win this WWE Undisputed Universal Championship. He's not doing that. And the reason is because Cody is the outsider. Roman is the insider. I might have to do another video, gentlemen, but if Cody ever gets a pin on Roman in this WWE run while Roman's still the champion, it's going to be in some type of non-title match. It's either going to be a tag team match, or maybe it'd be something like some type of special one-night tournament, maybe in Saudi Arabia or one of those type of shows where they have some type of special cup, you know, like a one-night 8-man tournament or some such thing. And the WWE Universal Undisputed title is not on the line, but they have Roman and Cody in the same tournament. They get to the finals. Cody pins Roman to win this tournament, whatever it is. but he does not get that title off of Roman. And that might be the bone they throw him, like the consolation prize. Mikey on Raw, Kevin Patrick needs to go. He's so bad. He reminds me of Josh Matthews. I believe you're talking about the commentating team, buddy. I haven't been watching Raw. I trust your judgment. The commentating in wrestling across both sides, AEW and WWE, could use a lot of improvement. We're a long way gone from the glory days of Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler. I'll say this, guys. I caught some of that AEW Collision, the Samoa Joe CM Punk match, and the commentary of, Kevin Kelly and was it Donovan, the old ROH wrestler? It was really good. It was really good. And I hate to say it, because Jim Ross is probably my all-time number one or number two commentator across the board. But Jim's best days are behind him. Tony Schiavone, oddly enough, has had a bit of a career resurgence, I think just because he has fun with it. Jimmy agrees with me when he says Roman will be protected in defeat. Mark my words. I'm going to have to do a whole video about this, Jimmy. I'm predicting it. I mean, I'll share the preview of my next video. Roman Reigns, I believe, is going to beat Bruno's record. I think he is. I think he's going to get. I think they've got him under a long-term agreement, either a written agreement or a handshake agreement. I think that what they're trying to do is establish Roman as this standard bearer for his generation and the next couple of generations. And that's why, in part, they created this Seth Rollins title, because they want other wrestlers to have a supposed world title. I mean, goes back to my point. How can you have two world titles in one wrestling promotion? But that will be the title, the Seth Rollins title, World Heavyweight Championship. That's going to be the one that will be hot potatoed. That's the one that other people will get. AJ might get a run. Who knows? Cody might get a run with that. But I think Roman's going to hold this thing, and I'm kind of spoiling my next video, but I think that the reason why Cody's not going to beat Roman, and who knows, maybe Roman will retire with it. Who knows? But I think Roman, I just looked this up, he'll be 43 if he does beat Bruno's record. And I'm not talking about combined, because Bruno had two runs. He had the 7-year and the 4-year. I think Roman beats the 7-year for this reign. That's just my prediction, guys. I'm going to do a whole video about that. Let me get to a few more comments here. This is fun. I haven't done this in a long time, guys. Thanks for checking it out. Even Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse the Body were a great commentating duo. You are correct. I think that was the commentating team, if I'm not mistaken, buddy, for WrestleMania 1 and WrestleMania 3. And I want to say WrestleMania 4 and 5 and 6, I believe. And I think it's 7. We got, I want to say Gorilla, and maybe it was Vince McMahon and Bobby the Brain, because I think by 7, Jesse was gone. But I think the first 6 were Gorilla and Jesse, but the exception would be WrestleMania 2, because everybody, they got split up because you had the 3 venues. WrestleMania 2 is underrated, guys. If for the younger guys out there, if you haven't watched your old WrestleManias, if you're really a WWE fan, WWF fan, watch the early WrestleManias, especially WrestleMania 2. It was very innovative, and I give him credit for that. Ryback versus Goldberg, your thoughts? I think Ryback, look, I watch some Ryback stuff. I'm actually one of the few supporters of Ryback. I know sometimes he says things that are outlandish, but he kind of reminds me of the Ultimate Warrior, like in his last couple of years, where I think these guys, Ryback and Ultimate Warrior, were both brutalized and victimized and had their feelings hurt by the WWE, so they lashed back. And I think when you talk about the Ultimate Warrior and what he said about Bobby Heenan, well, that's because, Bobby Heenan said some bad things about the Ultimate Warrior on that self-destruction DVD. So I think Ryback is a reactionary, and I don't blame him. I think a lot of these guys had their feelings hurt and they lashed back. So I like Ryback. I give him credit. I haven't gone so far as to buy his gimmick vitamins. And 6, that was the end. 7 was Gorilla and Bobby. Yes, 7 from LA. I think WrestleMania 7, Jimmy, was actually a pretty damn good WrestleMania. I think people underestimate the Sergeant Slaughter Hulk Hogan match. I think you had a Japanese tag team on WrestleMania 7 who beat Demolition. I believe Kerry Von Erich was on the undercard. That was a good match. I think he beat the Warlord. Or did he beat the Barbarian? Something like that. And Davey Boy Smith, I think, beat the Warlord at 7. all by memory, folks. You had, didn't you have DiBiase versus Virgil at WrestleMania 7? Let's see. Worst storyline. Thank you, Trish. With Zoe Stark versus Becky Lynch, it has been one-sided. It's getting boring, ruining both talents, including Zoe trying to make her another Shayna Baszler. Yeah, I'd agree with that, buddy. From the little that I've seen, I think Zoe Stark was at one of these NXT shows I've gone to in Jacksonville. Funny thing is, there's photographs. I went to remember the night when John Moxley beat Chris Jericho for the AEW title. That was, I believe, February 29th, 2020. That night, I actually went to an NXT show here in Jacksonville, and Ty Mello was on that show, who's now, of course, with AEW and married to Sammy Guevara. I just bring it up because it's funny how time flies. You know what I mean? The main event that night was Matt Riddle and Pete Dunne defended the tag team title against a couple of guys. I think against who's Gunther's partners, the Imperial guys. So, but yeah, I can see where some of these things, they just drag out and they're not very good. And I think they do have a problem with the women's division, both companies, but more so WWE, where if they're not fighting for a title, the women, that their storylines are either non-existent or weak. One thing that I thought was pretty good a couple of years ago during the pandemic was the Otis and Mandy Rose. I mean, if you remember, they were like the it couple for a few months. And, during the pandemic time, when you had to really concentrate on storyline stuff and outside the box stuff, the big fat guy, with the hot chick, that was a fun storyline. And what do? They make Otis a heel. So, I mean, guys, that's when I try not to shit on WWE all the time, although I feel like I do. But sometimes it's because they've come up with something that's pretty good, and rather than milk it and squeeze it and add layers to it, like they've done with the Bloodline, yes, but things like Mandy and Otis, they ruin it. So I don't know. Let's see. WrestleMania 7. This is Jimmy Faluca. WrestleMania 7 was very good. Jake versus Martel. Yes, the blindfold match had a good story. Taker began the streak, correct, I believe, over Jimmy Snuka, which is an interesting note because Snuka was so big 5 years before that. Bulldog versus Warlord, yep. Mr. Perfect versus Bossman, true, with Andre making a cameo. Warrior versus Savage stole the show. Let me just say this, Jimmy. When people shit on the Ultimate Warrior's wrestling ability, I say, look at WrestleMania 5, 6, and 7. Who had the best match of the night on each of those shows? Ultimate Warrior. You could make an argument that Savage and Hogan was better than Rude versus Warrior. I'd say they're right about neck and neck. I'd give the nod to Warrior and Rude as the best match at WrestleMania 5, but I wouldn't argue if someone said Hogan Savage. WrestleMania 6 was clearly Hogan Warrior. That's the only match people talk about from that show. WrestleMania 7, the match that everyone remembers is Warrior Savage. Like you said, stole the show. And Warrior had the best match for 3 WrestleManias in a row. And if you go forward a year, he got the biggest pop at WrestleMania 8. You can't take that away from him, and a lot of people try to. And I think that's when they did that self-destruction on the Ultimate Warrior video. Warrior said it himself. How did I self-destruct? I have no injuries. I'm living in Arizona with my wife and daughters. How the fuck did I self-destruct? So that's why he won the lawsuit. Virgil versus DiBiase was, in fact, decent, Jimmy. And Slaughter and Hogan, for a couple of 40-year-old guys, they were good. It was a good main event. Let's go back to this next comment. This is a lot of fun, guys. I appreciate you being here. Scorpion Fan 21 with the Pac-Man logo. I like that Pac-Man logo, by the way, or the avatar, I should say. Mikey, AEW Outcast, insult to WWE, Riot Squad, right? WCW, NWO. So the Outcast, is that the women's group with Paige, Tony Storm, and Ruby, whatever she's called, Ruby Soho? I believe that's what it is, right? I mean, look. That's the thing. I'm a big AEW fan, you know that. But one thing I don't like about AEW and pretty much all of wrestling, as far as the big two companies, is this overdependence on factions. It's like, look, how big, if it's maybe LA Knight is doing this, maybe that's why people are responding to him. But just having one wrestler who goes out, fights, talks smack, talks shit, and fights on his own without a fucking faction. Doesn't need a man. I mean, I think maybe they were trying to do that with our buddy there with the hot blonde, who's our guy that they made Demolition into. Who's that guy? Jimmy, you know what I'm talking about. The guy that with the gorgeous blonde wife. They made him look like a joke, last summer of 2022. But the point is, these factions are just so goddamn ridiculous. So LA Knight, if he's doing the one guy thing, one guy versus the world, that can get over. And it's just a matter of, is the WWE going to say, oh, this guy's getting over on his own, let's kill him? And that's unfortunately what they do, guys. I have lost count of the amount of times WWE had something good fall into their hands, into their laps, and they totally deserved it because they totally destroyed it because they couldn't get out of their own way. Yeah, well said, Jimmy. And Jimmy's doing a very good job of kind of paraphrasing my points here. We've seen it up and down for years. And here's the thing, guys. I was doing videos about this 4 or 5 years ago with Becky Lynch. When Becky Lynch was on that road to WrestleMania, I believe in 2018 or 2019? Yeah, the 2019 WrestleMania, when she was en route to beating Ronda and Charlotte at WrestleMania. Remember when they did that twisted ankle thing, or they did like a hurt knee thing with her? And it kind of just slowed the momentum because everybody knew she really didn't have a bad leg, because she would be at house shows and people are using their phones to record it, that she's actually handling the other leg, like she's favoring the bad leg and hobbling on the good leg because there was no leg injury. And at the time, I did a fucking video. I remember this one where I said that they are burying her alive, which means that they're pushing her, Becky Lynch, on her road to that WrestleMania 2 belts Becky thing. They're pushing her, but yet they're kind of diminishing her at the same time. Because I think Vince McMahon's on the record, or whatever people have said on behalf of Vince McMahon, that the thinking is they never want to be in a situation that they were in the mid-90s when Hogan went over to WCW and he had such a big fan base and such popularity and such mainstream recognition and Thunder in Paradise and the movies, although the movies weren't that good. But Hogan had such name value that, yes, the WWE really made that name value, that Hogan came back to bite them in the ass. And Hogan coming over to WCW was a big part, not the whole thing, but a huge part of WCW overtaking WWE for 2 or 3 years. So they never wanted to put themselves in that position again. They kind of did with The Rock and Austin to an extent, but I think Vince never wanted to have his balls, busted, or his company at the disposal of one of the boys. So and especially not a women's wrestler. We know how the WWE top people think about women. We know how Junior views women. We know how Johnny Ace views women. So they never wanted to have a woman like Becky Lynch get too over. Sure, she can get over, but they're not going to get her too over. Even when she won that title in that match with Ronda and Charlotte, first of all, they didn't just do what everybody wanted, which was head-on-head, Becky Lynch versus Ronda Rousey. They had to throw Charlotte in the mix because of the nepotism thing. Same thing with Roman, But they couldn't just have Becky beat Ronda clean. They had to throw somebody else in there for a three-way, which kind of gives Ronda an out. And also, if you remember, that was the 7-hour WrestleMania. A friend of mine, Cody PX Soto, if he watches this, he went to that WrestleMania. I believe that was in New York, right? And he said that people were falling asleep in the stands. By the time they got to Becky Lynch winning that title, with the crucifix pin over Ronda, which I thought was a good pin, by the way, people were falling asleep. And the reason is the WWE did not want to have, it's like Steve Austin beating Shawn Michaels 1, 2, 3, or Steve Austin a year later beating The Rock 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring. Jimmy chimes in once again. They don't want anyone being too popular to the point where they have to answer to them or the audience. Once again, paraphrasing me, buddy. After Lesnar left in 2004, there was a clear conscientious decision that they were never going to allow anyone to become bigger than the brand. Good point. That's why John Cena was forced. Yep. And that's why Roman Reigns was forced. Very good, Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy's got it. I mean, Jimmy nailed the comparison after The Rock and Austin, and that's a perfect comparison. So, like I said, I mean, that's why The Undertaker, he was... When did The Undertaker have like a really good run? Was kind of like 2005 to 2009, like when he was feuding with Edge and Randy Orton. And there was there was a time that like Undertaker was kind of pushed as the number one guy on SmackDown, if not the whole company, and he had like really long title reigns and stuff like that. But that wasn't his physical peak. I mean, his physical peak was at least 10 or 15 years earlier. I mean, you might say that his physical peak was back in the Mean Mark Callis days in WCW. Not to say his character peak or his experience, but just his physicality. But the reason why they push Undertaker so much, one of the reasons, first off, he's over with the fans, but he's also a loyal soldier. He's a loyalist, and they love loyalists. And Roman Reigns is a loyalist. Compare those guys. And I'm just making a comparison. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but compare those guys to people like Bret Hart or Shane Douglas, or even to some extent Steve Austin, guys that are going to buck back a little bit. You know what I mean? Brock Lesnar going after Cody is favorite by Roman and Paul Heyman. I bet you Paul working with Brock in secrets. Yeah, if you're speaking storyline, buddy, I can totally see Brock Lesnar becoming like the backup. And I can see almost like talking about Triple H and Steve Austin back in 2002. One storyline I liked from that era, guys, I don't know if you remember this or if you liked it, was the two-man power trip. Kind of the early half of 2002 before Triple H got injured in that tag match with Benoit and Jericho when he blew out his quad. But I mean, if you remember the two-man power trip, could you see Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar two-man power trip? Now that might put Solo on the outside. I mean, Solo could kind of be like the third guy, like the henchman or something like that. But I mean, I think if they were ever to, because I think they had a stip. Now, granted, it's a wrestling stip, so it doesn't count for anything. But if Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar never do feud again, which they're not supposed to, because they're supposed to have their last match at SummerSlam last year, you could easily do a Brock Lesnar Roman Reigns tag team thing, where Brock is like the henchman, like Brock is the Arn Anderson to Roman Reigns as Ric Flair. We got a big comment here. But yeah, I mean, I think you could be doing that, buddy. Paul Heyman bringing in Brock to defend Roman, that's fine. He's almost kind of doing that unofficially if he's fighting Cody all the time. The only reason I was not a fan of the two-man power trip was because they really didn't have a good counterbalance to them. Good point. Rock was in Hollywood, and as much as I love and respect The Undertaker, he was not an adequate replacement for the loss of the top babyface in Steve Austin. True. Hindsight being 2020, Austin should have never become a bad guy because nobody wanted to hate him. Well, true. And we all kind of go along with that, buddy. Like a lot of people, even Austin and Jim Ross always dwells on it that Austin shouldn't have turned heel. The funny thing was, though, Austin turning heel at WrestleMania 17, it kind of brought out some of the best of Austin's stuff, because if you think about it, in that year of 2001, that's when he did all the comedy stuff with Kurt Angle, when they were wearing the little hats and blowing the kazoos or whatever. And the what chant started with the invasion angle. I mean, if you want to know where the what chant started, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a thing on SmackDown where Austin, as the leader of the invasion, brought in Raven, Taz, and I think Palumbo and O'Hare. He brought them all in to the ring, and he started the what chant by taking off his belt from his shorts, his jean shorts, and whipping the chest of Taz. And he was basically starting the what thing. That's when it started. So that was when Austin was a heel, and people, like Jimmy just did, shit all over Austin's heel turn in 2001. But as far as the comedy stuff with Angle, and actually a lot of good matches happen with Austin as the heel. The Benoit, Jericho, Austin three-man match was really good. I think that was the last pay-per-view before, I want to say that was in June. Was that King of the Ring 2001? But basically, Austin versus Kurt Angle had a couple of good matches before and after 9/11. They traded the titles, and then later on, Angle kind of joined them when Triple H was out. So I feel like that was actually, I think people make too much of that. I think that Austin turning heel creatively, he had done all he could do as a babyface. He had beaten everybody as a babyface. They had done Undertaker and Austin to death. I think one thing about Austin turning heel, Jimmy, that you probably making allusions to, is that the Undertaker and Austin had wrestled so much, people were sick of it. And also, if you think about it, that was the Undertaker as the American Badass. which I personally liked, but most people didn't. So The Undertaker and Kane versus Triple H and Austin was really a dud. But I think if you look at things like, I think that the match that Triple H got injured in, that tag team title loss against Jericho and Benoit, and credit once again to Triple H for finishing the match. But I think that could have been an angle that they would have gone deeper and deeper with, because you could do Benoit versus Triple H, Benoit versus Austin, Jericho versus Triple H, Jericho versus Austin one-on-one. I think that tag team match, guys, was the thing to kind of start that, four-man feud. And unfortunately, Triple H got injured, and that was the end of that. Let's see. Jimmy has another thing. You can't do a true invasion of WCW, you can't do a true invasion of WCW without Hall, Nash, and Hogan. Whatever the cost is, whatever the headache you have to deal with, you need those three along with Ric Flair and Eric Bischoff. Just having them off the bat, you will make enough money to bring other guys in like Sting or possibly Goldberg. Well, let's break this down, buddy, because look, I've never dealt with the type of money that these guys have dealt with, but I think part of the problem with that is Hogan, Nash, and Hall were all getting, what they call the mailbox money. They were all under Time Warner contracts, not necessarily WCW contracts. So they're basically getting paid to stay at home because there was no WCW. So for those, and I think part of it, buddy, is those guys just needed a rest. I mean, if you think about Hogan, and what would that be, 2001? How long had Hogan been going pretty strong by then? 20 years? And yeah, a couple of years he had off here and there. But I think still he wanted to recharge his batteries, rest. One thing I give credit to these wrestlers, either the wrestlers today or especially the wrestlers of the earlier generations, they do work hurt. They do work injured. And I think, Nash has had what, 13 or 15 knee operations. At that time, he probably had 7 or 8 at least. That's Kevin Nash. Scott Hall, he had a lot of trouble. Let's admit it. Physical trouble and his own issues. So I think these guys were more than happy to take a paycheck without actually having to work for it. Bischoff was even getting paid like that for a little while, and so was Flair. I think Flair, you might have been able to convince, to get bought out of that contract or whatever it would take to get him into WWE early. I can see that. And you know what? Eric Bischoff in 83 Weeks has told the story, Jimmy, that Jim Ross called Eric Bischoff because they wanted Eric to be part of that initial invasion angle. But it was 4th of July weekend when they called Bischoff. That's the anniversary of his father's death. The 4th of July is Bischoff's wife's birthday. He always does a big party for the whole weekend. And Jim Ross was not able to tell him what Eric would be used for. He just wanted to see if Eric was available, and Eric and Jim were not on great terms at that point because Eric was the guy that fired Jim Ross, 5 or 6 years earlier, 93, I guess, for WCW, so 8 years earlier. So the point is, Bischoff didn't really know what they wanted from him. Jim didn't feel like he could trust Bischoff to tell him, so it didn't happen. But yeah, it could have been good. As far as, here's the other thing, part of that, guys. You've heard that thing with WCW and the contracts that, was it the first world, the rule of first approval or whatever, that if Nash and Hall were under contract, when they brought in the Road Warriors or they brought in somebody else, they would always have to match Hall and Nash's money to whoever they brought in and gave more money to. So if they were going to bring in, say, Lex Luger, and Luger was going to get paid more than Hall and Nash were in this 96, 97 era, they would have to match, they would have to raise Hall and Nash. Now, if you look over at WWE, I think if they paid a lot of money to get Sting, Flair, Nash, and Hall, then guys like Triple H, Rob Van Dam, Booker T, guys that had been there in WWE for a while, Kurt Angle, they would all want guaranteed raises. I want to get to everybody's comments. Jimmy says, the big names, I believe, were paid by Turner Broadcasting. You are correct in that aspect. However, McMahon did have the ability to offer them enough money to where they would come in. Jim Cornette has touched on this when he approached with the invasion subject, and he said that they spent over $10 million on a restaurant in Times Square. I remember that, the World. Why spend money on that when you can build the biggest angle in history and get a payoff 10 times the amount of what you pay to get the talent? Well, I agree with you, Jimmy, but I'm going to tell you what they were thinking. Vince Ross, that's a cool name. Vince McMahon is a self-hating wrestling promoter. He's always wanted to be known for more than wrestling. If you look back at his history, it's all there for everyone to see. The movies, No Holds Barred, was not really a wrestling movie. Okay, in a lot of ways, it was something else. Um, it tried to be a drama. It tried to be a romance. I mean, Joan Severance looked good, but I mean, No Holds Barred was not just a strict wrestling movie. The WBF, World Bodybuilding Federation, which is hilarious. If you can find that on YouTube, that's just hilarious. He tried to get into the bodybuilding world, the non-steroid bodybuilding world. If you look at WWE films, in the 2000s, the Kane one was horrible. I couldn't watch the whole thing. I've heard that some of them were pretty good. That Triple H one where he played the ex-con actually looked pretty good. Never saw it, though. I think it's called The Chaperone. The Big Show one looked decent. Never saw that either. But the point is, the movies that they did do one with Halle Berry that was pretty good, but didn't have any wrestlers in it. Not that I can remember. My point is, what else have they done that's been a flop? The other WWE non-wrestling stuff, they promoted one boxing match. Most people forget that. But the WWE actually promoted a Sugar Ray Leonard fight on pay-per-view in late 1988 against Donnie Lalonde, light heavyweight title. My friend Vinny Pazienza was on the undercard of that, fought Roger Mayweather, who's Floyd Mayweather's uncle. So the point is, Junior McMahon has always been a self-hating wrestling promoter. He hates the word wrestling. We all know this sports entertainment stuff. He really wants to be an entertaining promoter, an entertainment promoter. So the World, which I believe it was called WWE New York or WWF New York at the time, and then it was called the World back and forth. That was like, hey, we can open a restaurant in Times Square. You know what I mean? I believe there was even an amusement park in Canada or Niagara Falls. This is an obscure thing. There was some type of amusement park that kind of had a WWE theme, at least part of it. I saw some YouTube video. Some guy broke that down for us if you look that up. Thank you, Jimmy. Favored Nations Agreement. Where did Jimmy's comment go? The Favored Nations Agreement. I'm trying to show Jimmy's comment here. I'm pushing the button, but it's not working. So the Favored Nations Agreement, well, that was the agreement that had that Hall and Nashua given, that Hall and Nash were given. You're doing the speech thing, right? Favored Nations Agreement, that was the agreement that Hall and Nash were given. If anyone got paid more than them, they had to be bumped up. That was a bad business decision by the people who ran WCW. We can say that, which you just did. However, they wanted Hall and Nash so bad because they thought that I was going to put them over the top. They were right. I mean, once I think Hall coming over to WCW Nitro, I don't think that started the 83-week streak, but that was a big tipping point. So, I mean, we can kind of Monday morning quarterback and say in the big picture, did that give other wrestlers, heartache? Did that cause trouble down the line for the WCW? Probably. But if you're trying to win a ratings war, which why guys like us that remember it, or even younger guys that go back and watch, the WWE series, the Monday Night Wars, or if they do research on other YouTube videos, that's why it was so exciting, because you had two companies. Like, imagine if Coke and Pepsi had a Monday night program somehow, or something like that, or two. Say that the USFL, the United States Football League, was a big thing, and they actually had Monday Night Football, USFL, on one channel, and then the NFL was on another channel. And say the USFL actually had real money to compete with the NFL for players, that would be pretty exciting, And I think that's what we experienced in those mid to late 90s, even into 2001. And we'll never have something like that again. I mean, the closest thing recently was AEW versus NXT on Wednesday nights. That was something. The agreement you were touching upon that Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were given is called Favored Nations. Yep. Basically, anyone who came in after them, they were being offered more money. Hall and Nash were bumped up. Very bad. Yeah, okay, so we just covered that. Correct. I read the same thing twice. I entered a time warp. Scott Hall, here's another comment. By Jimmy Faluca, who's a very smart wrestling guy. And wrestling fans, the Shane McKenna world, we'll give him a shout out. Mark Thiecki and Jimmy are always kind of feuding online, which is whatever happened to our other buddy Jimmy, the guy. I've kind of lost touch with him. I should check in with him. The bald gentleman from, I think, Jersey or somewhere. I think you knew him in real life. I got to see what he's up to. Scott Hall showing up was the turning point for WCW. I remember seeing that live. Yes, it was Memorial Day weekend, wasn't it, of 1996? Believe it or not, a very young Mike Messier, was in Las Vegas in a hotel when I saw that situation happen with Scott Hall coming out in the middle of an opening match. I think it was Mike Enos. And who was the other guy? Was it? It was a job guy or some kind. It was like Mike Enos and the Barbarian or one of Thunder and Lightning or someone who was kind of on the mid card side of things. I mean, when I say close with Vince Russo, we've talked a few times. I've been on his podcast. We're not, playing racquetball together every Friday night, but we have had some off the air conversations and we've done some podcasts together. You said that you were close with Vince Russo. He did his own version of the invasion angle with Sean Oliver. And the way he started it was Scott Hall jumped the guardrail and called out Vince, begging for his job back. It led to eventually Kevin Nash doing the same. And then on pay-per-view, got the first appearance of Hulk Hogan. He started that angle off pretty well, I have to admit. I'll have to watch that, Jimmy. I mean, I trust what you're saying, that if it was good, it was good. I will say this, and look, I like Vince Russo as a person, but I do feel that part of what he did in WCW as a writer that was not so great was kind of this idea that he had, apparently, that you're telling me about. He was always kind of putting WWE over on WCW programming. I think AEW, for whatever the fuck reason, has done that a lot too. I mean, when MJF goes out there and he says, I'm hoping to impress my friends, Paul and Vince and Stanford. And when MJF does that in 2022, 2023, 2021, he's basically shitting on the program that he's a part of. It really makes very little sense. It's wrestler sense, which basically means idiot sense. A lot of times these wrestlers think that playing to the smart fan base like us is the intelligent thing, but it's actually not. It's too cutesy. It's too inside baseball. It's just not a smart idea. And I think that one of the things creatively, putting the money and my personal friendship with Vince Russo aside, I think one thing that's a big mistake is for that Southern Wrestling WCW hardcore fan, legacy fan in 2001 era, 2001, they don't want to hear about how great fucking WCW is. I'm sorry, how great WWF is in WCW. They want to hear Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen are getting back together. They want to see something like that. And to jam, New York is better and all. And the other thing, I like Vince Russo as a person, but Vince Russo as a character, for him to put the title on himself, for him to be in the ring so much when he couldn't really have a full wrestling match. Although, interestingly enough, Vince Russo did train to be a wrestler as a younger guy. It's discrediting the talent. And they had guys like Jeff Jarrett, and they had guys like Shane Douglas and Marcus Alexander Bagwell and Bam Bam Bigelow. They could have had so many guys, be the top heel, be the top baby face in WCW. And here's the weird thing, Jimmy and everybody else that's still with us. If you watch end of the line WCW, like, 2000, 2001, even guys like Sid and Scott Steiner at Starrcade, I think at the last Starrcade 2000, they were still getting really big pops. And yeah, the fan base was smaller, but they were still making a lot of noise. I mean, I've sat here and I've watched some of the dying days of WCW, right at the very end, their last 16 or 17 months in business, right? And this was supposed to be the worst time to watch WCW, but some of that shit, like Goldberg turning heel, and then the next night, I think it's Kevin Nash calling out the heel Goldberg, they're getting bigger pops and bigger reactions than things were getting, a couple of years ago in WWE. You know what I mean? So that's just something to think about. Jimmy, once again, MJF is misguided. He thinks it's just going to get him heat, but what he's really doing is putting down the police he actually works for, the place that he actually works for. Exactly. I mean, that's what I said, buddy. You and I are definitely on the same page tonight, Jimmy. I was trying to get our buddy Chris Old, I think he's from jolly old England, up in here so I can kind of explain to him why I'm saying that Cody Rhodes is not going to beat Roman Reigns, because Cody Rhodes represents the outsider. He represents the individualist, and he's there for a paycheck, and he's there to get pinned. Will he ever get a victory over Roman Reigns? I'm sure he will, but it won't be for any type of title. It will be for a tournament championship, or a tournament final win, some type of meaningless tournament, or it'll be in a tag team match. And look, once you saw Jey Uso pin Roman Reigns in that tag match, didn't that just kind of blow up the whole Cody Rhodes thing? And Chris was right. He read my post correctly. I am mocking the people that said that Cody Rhodes was going to beat Roman Reigns at SummerSlam because they couldn't handle the fact that they were so easily duped into thinking that Cody Rhodes was going to beat Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. And I made a video that I put out weeks in advance that said Roman's at 80% chance to win, Cody's 20%. I was totally correct, and nobody gave me my goddamn flowers, as the kids say. WCW didn't prepare for the future. They had no answer after the NWO, and that was their fatal mistake. Yeah, and I think you're right, buddy. And I think when you fall into a trap of relying on any type of storyline, especially the faction storyline. Here's two things in wrestling that are really antiquated, but they still use them. It's the factions. The invasions, especially the invasion faction, is the worst, most overdone thing at this point. And also the commissioner, whatever you want to call the Vince McMahon, actually the Eric Bischoff role. But they were doing that stuff, with the Boss in World Class Championship Wrestling in like 1990, or in Global Wrestling Federation. They've been doing like heel, unseen powers that be for a long time. It just didn't start with Eric Bischoff. It didn't start with Vince McMahon, that's for sure. But it's so played out. When they were doing like the anonymous heel, whatever the fuck, general manager on Raw 10 years ago, that was played out. Why can't the wrestlers be in charge of the wrestling? Like when Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen had all these titles, they were the heels. They weren't kissing ass to Teddy Long on SmackDown or to whoever the fuck on Raw. I mean, the general manager thing is so god awful and so boring because the general managers don't wrestle. That's the point. The last time I can think that was really entertaining was when Bischoff and Austin were co-general managers, and that's because those two guys were excellent in their roles. Vince McMahon is on record saying he would rather have half the house cheering the guy he wants rather than a full building cheering the guy he doesn't want. I believe you. Kevin Nash has quoted him saying that. I believe that too. And I believe Kevin Nash. Well, I've worked with Kevin Nash in the movie The Manor that I co-wrote. I worked with Kevin Nash in a film, so I know he's not a bullshit artist. I've listened to Kevin Nash talk about wrestling into the wee hours of the morning. That's a severe egomaniac at work, my friend. And you're talking about Vince McMahon, and you're right, Jimmy. And here's the thing, guys. Like I said, if you really have an issue with WWE Creative, the best thing you can do is watch. There's a great YouTube channel I found. It's called CWA Memphis, and it just has a lot of great wrestling stuff, a lot of Japan stuff. It's not just Memphis wrestling. It's a lot of stuff, from the thing with Japanese wrestling is I love to watch Japanese wrestling, but it's kind of like I have to be on the phone with somebody and I'll put that on in the background. And the reason is without English speaking commentary, I have a real hard time enjoying some of these awesome matches because they have guys like Tenaru and they have Stan Hansen and Jumbo Tsuruta and all these interesting wrestlers, Bruiser Brody, Jimmy Snuka, and the stuff in Hulk Hogan even had good matches in Japan. But without English commentary, it's hard for me to watch it. So if I'm on the phone with somebody, if I'm doing something else that I can listen to audibly and I can watch the Japanese match from the early 80s, mid 80s, even the 70s, the Funks in Japan, the Road Warriors in Japan, I enjoy that. But I used to say this in college. We used to have this running joke because I was in college in Providence, Rhode Island, and there's a Ivy League school there called Brown University that had a ton of Asian students. So what we always joked about is that we wanted to adopt or kidnap a Japanese speaking student from Brown and bring them back to our dorm and force them to translate the Japanese commentary into English because we wanted to know what the fuck was going on with those things. Here's a good point Jimmy makes. Mick Foley in Japan, Mick Foley in 2000 was a great commissioner. When he had the shaved head, remember when he had his own haircut? Ever see Vader's matches in Japan? Holy shit, that man was a monster. Yeah, and I believe he actually didn't he tag team with Bam Bam Bigelow? And I don't know if they ever had this match. Did they ever have Bigelow and Vader versus Dr. Death and Terry Gordy? That would be something I'd like to find if that exists. I actually did see Gordy and Doc together, the Miracle Violence Connection. I was there on August 2nd, 1992 at the Baltimore Arena when Sting was injured by Jake the Snake coming out of the crowd. Long story short, Ron Simmons won the world title. And the main event that night, at least the last match on the show, was Gordy and Doc 2 out of 3 falls against the Steiners. We'll talk about that on our summer podcast, Jimmy. Yes, they did. They were the tag champions. So if they actually had that, I think you're saying Bigelow and Vader were tag champions in Japan. I think that was probably IWGP tag team champions. I'd love to know if they fought Gordy and Doc and if that's on tape somewhere. Yeah, Hogan and Muta had some good matches. I think I've seen one of them. I made a point I've seen one, but not the other. It was also interesting, Jimmy. I think that Hogan wrestled both versions. He wrestled the Great Muta with mask, and he wrestled Kenji Muto without the mask of paint. So anyway, guys, I think I'm going to wrap this up right at the 1 hour mark. So we got about 3.5, 4 minutes. If you have anything else you want to chime in, now's the opportunity. For those of you that are watching on tape delay, you might be saying, well, gee whiz, Mike, this is very exciting. Where have you been our whole lives? If you're a new-time watcher, this is One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan, the channel that used to be what did I call it before? Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. I actually broke up my channel into 3 different things. So now I have this channel, One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan, which is about MMA, pro wrestling, of course. I'm going to do a very interesting football video coming up soon. And I also do One Mike Messier, which is my movie reviews. And thanks, Jimmy. I appreciate that, buddy. And I look forward to talking to you either this weekend or next week. You let me know your schedule. We're going to, for those of you that are still with us, Jimmy and I, who's Facebook user, but Jimmy and I he's going to be my guest on StreamYard, and I will be doing this in the Foreign Object Facebook group. And also, if you haven't subscribed, if you're still with us, go ahead and subscribe. It's not going to kill you. And Jimmy and I are going to have a very special podcast about summertime wrestling memories. So, Jimmy, I might as well just tell you here, buddy, what I'd like you to do is think about things, summer, whatever that means to you. I typically think Memorial Day until Labor Day, more or less. But stuff that either you attended live or you saw on TV, in live time. It could have been on tape delay, or I have a few memories, buddy, of things I missed out on. For instance, the night that Hogan joined the NWO, or the NWO was born, I was actually at a pro wrestling show, but it wasn't the NWO Hogan Bash of the Beach. I was at a different wrestling show that night. And there's also a match that I missed. I could have gone to one of those Colt Cabana. Who's the former NWA champion that's like the SmackDown commissioner now? The bald guy over on SmackDown or Raw that used to be in the NWA. I could have gone to one of their matches that summer. They had a dog chain match somewhere, a dog collar match, and I could have gone to that, and unfortunately I didn't. A mistake that I'm still thinking about, and that was 10 or 12 years ago. But I do have a lot of great wrestling memories from the summer. Vader and Simmons is probably the number one memory. Some of the Bash of the Beach shows, just watching on TV in live time. Just a lot of good, I think summer is an interesting time for wrestling because the kids are out of school. So you think it would be the hottest time, but at the same time, I think a lot of people are doing other things besides watching wrestling, the beach or vacation or family time. So I think the summer is a really interesting time. So whatever memories you have, Jimmy, whenever we do this, like I said, you message me your schedule. I'll work with whatever you can do. And we'll do like an hour or 2 podcasts. Jimmy's got plenty of summer wrestling memories. Have a cold drink handy because we're going to have a good time. Looking forward to it already, buddy. The last time Jimmy and I talked wrestling, we had some type of debate going on. I can't even remember what it was, but we talked for 3 half-hour episodes. I want to say that was almost 3 years ago because I think it was 2020. So we're way overdue for another check-in. I do appreciate guys like Jimmy, Mark Thiefke, Shane McKenna, even my buddy Chris Old. My buddy Michael A.J. Norris is always giving me good inside information. Like I said, I'm going to be going to 3 NXT shows. 2 are back-to-back. I actually bought these tickets to other towns for NXT in the summer because I didn't think they were coming to Jacksonville. And then guess what? They added Jacksonville. So I'll actually be going, I think, on the 22nd, the 23rd in August, maybe 2nd or August 15th. Okay, guys, like I said, one pro wrestling and sports fan, one Mike Messier from Mike's Instant Movie Reviews. My Flash review is unbelievably good. Talk to you tomorrow, sir. We will be figuring out our date for this live podcast, and one Man in a Camera Films. Thanks, Jimmy, and thanks for everybody for taking part. Have a good week.